The Arizona sun had finally surrendered to night, and Clara Brennan stood on the porch of her trading post, watching the temperature drop from unbearable to merely uncomfortable. August in the Sonoran Desert was a special kind of hell. Days so hot you could fry an egg on the rocks. Nights cold enough to make you shiver in the same shirt that had been soaked with sweat just hours before. She was 17 years old and had been alone for 6 months, ever since the fever took both her parents within a week of each other. The trading post her father had built sat at the intersection of 3 trails, one leading to Fort Bowie, one to the Mexican border, and one that wound through Apache territory into the mountains. It was a good location for trade, her father had always said. It was also a dangerous location to be a young woman alone. Clara had learned to be careful. She kept her father's shotgun within reach. She never opened the post after dark. And she'd learned to read the signs of trouble. Dust clouds on the horizon, unusual silence from the birds, the nervous way horses acted when Apache scouts were near. Tonight, something felt wrong. The cavalry patrol had come through that afternoon, Lieutenant Marcus Webb and 12 soldiers, all looking grim and purposeful. Webb had barely acknowledged Clara, which was unusual. Normally he'd stop to ask questions, to remind her that she should sell the trading post and move to somewhere more appropriate for a young lady. But today he'd just purchased water and supplies. His jaw tight and his eyes hard. Clara had watched them ride toward the small cavalry camp a half-mile east, and she'd noticed they were dragging something behind one of the horses. At first she'd thought it was a dead animal, but then she'd seen movement. A person, bound and being pulled through the desert like a sack of grain. That had been 8 hours ago. Now as Clara stood in the moonlight, she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the desert night. A low moan, barely human, carried on the wind. It came from the direction of the cavalry camp. Clara knew she should ignore it. Whatever Webb was doing wasn't her business. Getting involved with cavalry matters could get her killed, or worse, could make her a target. But the sound came again, and this time she could hear the desperation in it. She grabbed a canteen of water, her father's knife, and moved into the darkness. The moon was 3/4 full, providing enough light to navigate by. Clara knew every rock, every cactus, every dangerous spot on this land. She moved silently, the way her father had taught her when they used to track game together. The cavalry camp was quiet, too quiet. No fires, no voices, no movement. That was strange. Webb usually posted sentries, kept fires burning, but tonight the camp looked abandoned. Then Clara saw why, about 50 yards from the camp. In clear moonlight where anyone approaching could see, a man hung chained to a wooden post, driven deep into the ground. His arms were stretched above his head, his body sagging forward, held up only by the chains. He wore the breechcloth and moccasins of an Apache warrior, and even from a distance Clara could see the blood on his back, the way his head hung limp. He was bait. Clara understood immediately. Webb had set a trap. He'd left this man here, visible and vulnerable, hoping that other Apache would come to rescue him. And when they did, Webb's soldiers would be waiting in the darkness, ready to ambush. It was cruel and clever, and it made Clara's stomach turn. She should leave. She should go back to her trading post, bar the door and pretend she'd seen nothing. That's what any sensible person would do. But Clara had never been particularly sensible. She waited and watched for 20 minutes, studying the shadows, looking for any sign of hidden soldiers. But Webb must have been confident in his trap. He'd taken his men somewhere with better cover, probably the rocks to the north, where they could see anyone approaching. Clara moved quickly once she'd made her decision. She ran to the post, keeping low, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Up close, the warrior was worse than she'd thought. His back bore the marks of a whip. His face was bruised and swollen, and his lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. The chains were heavy military iron padlocked to the post. "Can you hear me?" Clara whispered. The man's eyes opened, dark and feverish but aware. He tried to speak, but no sound came from his parched throat. Clara held the canteen to his lips. "Drink slowly." He drank in desperate gulps, and Clara had to pull the canteen away to keep him from making himself sick. Not too much at once. After he'd drunk about half the canteen, his eyes focused on her more clearly. "Why?" he managed to whisper in English. "Why help?" "Because leaving you here to die would make me as bad as the people who chained you." Clara examined the padlocks. They were solid, military issue. She couldn't break them. But the post, she pulled out her father's knife and began digging around the base of the post. The ground was hard, packed desert clay, and her progress was agonizingly slow. Every scrape of the knife sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. "They will kill you," the warrior whispered, "for helping me." "Probably," Clara agreed, not stopping her work. "What's your name?" "Nahale. It means wise one, though I do not feel very wise right now. I'm Clara, and you're wise enough to know I'm risking my life doing this, so let's not waste time talking." It took nearly an hour of digging before the post was loose enough. Clara's hands were bleeding, her arms ached, and she'd broken her father's knife, but finally the post shifted. With Nahale pushing and Clara pulling, they managed to work it free from the ground. Nahale collapsed forward, still chained to the post, but no longer anchored to the earth. Clara helped him stand, slinging his arm over her shoulders. "Can you walk?" "I can run if I must." But his legs buckled almost immediately, and Clara had to support most of his weight. They couldn't go back to the trading post. That would be the first place Webb would look. But Clara knew every hiding place within 5 miles. There was a small canyon a quarter-mile south, with caves that provided shelter, and a hidden spring that rarely went dry. "We need to move," Clara said. "Can you make it?" Nahale nodded, straightening with visible effort. Together they stumbled away from the cavalry camp, Clara half carrying him, both of them expecting at any moment to hear shouts or gunfire as Webb's men discovered the escape. But the night remained silent except for their labored breathing and the soft sound of their feet on sand and rock. They reached the canyon just as Clara's strength was giving out. The cave was small and well hidden, accessible only by a narrow path between 2 boulders. Inside it was cool and dark, and the sound of trickling water echoed off the stone walls. Clara helped Nahale to the ground, and he immediately collapsed, his breathing ragged. She fetched water from the spring and brought it to him, along with strips of dried meat from her pocket. "You need to eat something, and I need to treat those wounds. You should go," Nahale said between bites. "When the soldiers discover I'm gone, they will come to your trading post. They will think you helped me. They'll think that because it's true," Clara pointed out, "which means going back now won't help. They'll arrest me either way. Then you should run. Go south to Mexico. Start over somewhere else." Clara looked at this stranger she'd just risked everything to save. "That's my home. My father built it with his own hands. I'm not running away because some lieutenant wants to play games with people's lives. Lieutenant Webb is not playing games. He is hunting my people. 6 days ago, his soldiers attacked our camp while the warriors were away hunting. They killed women, children, elders. My sister—" Nahale's voice broke. "My little sister was 10 years old." Clara felt sick. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Webb says we raided his supply wagons, that we killed his men, but we did not. We have been at peace trying to survive on the reservation land they gave us. Land with no game, no water, nothing but rocks and promises that are always broken." Nahale met her eyes. "I went to him to talk, to explain that we were not the ones who attacked his wagons. He had me arrested, beaten, and chained to that post. He said he would leave me there until my people came for me, and then he would kill them all." "That's murder," Clara whispered. "That is war. Or at least that is what men like Webb call it, when they want to justify their actions." Nahale leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You have made a powerful enemy tonight, Clara. Webb will not forgive this." "Good," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "I'm not looking for his forgiveness." She spent the next hour cleaning Nahale's wounds as best she could. The whip marks on his back were deep, and she used water from the spring and strips torn from her petticoat to bind them. The chains still hung from his wrists. She had no way to remove them without proper tools, but at least the post was gone. As dawn began to lighten the sky, Clara stood at the cave entrance and looked toward her trading post. She could see smoke rising, more smoke than usual. Her heart sank. "They found it," she said quietly. "They're at my trading post." Nahale struggled to his feet and came to stand beside her. Even injured and exhausted, he moved with a warrior's grace. "I am sorry." "This is my fault." "No," Clara said firmly. "This is Webb's fault. You're just the excuse he's using." She turned to face Nahale. "I need to go back. The trading post has everything I own, and I need to know what Webb's planning." "He is planning to kill you," Nahale said bluntly. or arrest you and make you stand trial for helping an enemy of the United States. Either way, your life as you knew it is over. Clara knew he was right, but she also knew she couldn't hide in this cave forever. Then I guess I need to figure out what my new life looks like. As the sun rose over the Arizona desert, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red, Clara made her way back toward the trading post. Nahale wanted to come with her, but she'd convinced him to stay hidden. His presence would only make things worse. What she found when she reached home made her blood run cold. Lieutenant Webb sat on her porch, his soldiers surrounding the trading post. The door hung open, and Clara could see they'd searched inside, throwing things around, looking for evidence. Webb saw her approaching and stood, his hand resting on his pistol. "Miss Brennan," he said, his voice cold as winter, "we need to have a conversation about your activities last night." Clara stopped 20 feet from her porch, close enough to talk, but far enough to run if needed. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lieutenant. Don't you?" Webb descended the porch steps slowly, like a predator stalking prey. "A prisoner escaped last night. A dangerous Apache warrior who was being held for crimes against the United States. And, interestingly, tracks lead from the camp toward your trading post before disappearing in the rocks. Lots of people pass through here, Lieutenant. You know that. True, but not many people would be foolish enough to interfere with military operations. Not many people would risk hanging for treason by aiding an enemy combatant." Webb's eyes were hard and cold. "Where is he, Miss Brennan?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Webb moved closer, and Clara's hand drifted toward the knife at her belt. "I'm going to ask you one more time, where is he?" Before Clara could answer, something whistled through the air and thudded into the porch post behind Webb. An arrow, its shaft still vibrating from impact. Everyone froze. Clara looked up at the rocks surrounding her trading post and saw them. At least a dozen Apache warriors positioned on high ground, arrows nocked and ready. They'd appeared as silently as ghosts, and now they had every soldier in their sights. One warrior stood slightly forward of the others, and Clara recognized him even at this distance. An older man with a scarred face and bearing that spoke of authority. He called out in Apache, his voice carrying across the distance. Webb's face had gone white. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and exposed in the open with no cover. "What did he say?" he demanded of Clara. Clara didn't speak Apache, but she understood the message clearly enough. "I think he's telling you to leave, now." Another arrow whistled down, this one landing even closer to Webb's feet. The message was unmistakable. Webb's jaw tightened with fury, but he wasn't stupid enough to start a fight he couldn't win. "Mount up," he ordered his men. "We're pulling back to Fort Bowie." As the soldiers scrambled for their horses, Webb turned back to Clara one last time. "This isn't over, Miss Brennan. You've chosen your side and you'll answer for it. Mark my words, you'll hang for what you've done. Then I guess I'll see you at my trial." "Lieutenant," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Webb and his men rode away at a gallop, leaving Clara alone in the yard. She looked up at the rocks where the warriors had been, but they'd vanished as silently as they'd appeared, all except one. Nahale emerged from behind a boulder, still moving stiffly but walking on his own. He made his way down to where Clara stood, his dark eyes unreadable. "My people saw what you did," he said quietly. "They saw you free me. They saw you risk everything. I just did what was right." "No," Nahale said. "You did what was impossible. You stood between two enemies and chose neither side. You chose humanity instead." He paused. "But now you are in great danger. Webb will return with more soldiers. He will not rest until you are punished." "I know," Clara said, looking at her trading post, the home her parents had built, the life she'd known. "So what do I do now?" Nahale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You survive. You adapt, and if you will allow it, my people will help you. We owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid." Clara looked at this man she'd freed, at the mountains in the distance, at the vast desert spreading in all directions. Her old life was over. Webb had made sure of that. But maybe, just maybe, a new life was beginning, one that would require more courage than she'd ever imagined. Clara stood in the ruins of her trading post's interior, surveying the damage Webb's soldiers had left behind. They'd overturned shelves, scattered goods across the floor, even smashed several jars of preserved food. either looking for evidence or simply taking out their frustration. The shotgun her father had left her was gone, confiscated as military contraband. Most of her ammunition had been taken as well. She was picking up broken glass when Nahali appeared in the doorway. He'd washed the blood from his face at the spring, and in the morning light she could see him more clearly, probably in his early 20s, with strong features and eyes that held both intelligence and deep sadness. "May I enter?" he asked formally. "It's a trading post," Clara said. "Everyone's welcome. That's kind of the point." Nahal stepped inside, moving carefully, still favoring his injured ribs. "My uncle wants to speak with you. Delshay, the one who led the warriors this morning. He says you have earned the right to counsel with us." "I'm honored," Clara said, meaning it. "But first, we need to get those chains off your wrists. I have tools here that might work." It took 2 hours and 3 broken hacksaw blades, but eventually the manacles fell away. Nahal rubbed his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin, wincing at the raw wounds. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I had begun to think I would wear those chains until I died." "You're free now," Clara said. "You should go to your people, get proper care for those injuries." "I will. But first you must come with me. Delshay insists. He says—" Nahal paused, choosing his words carefully. "He says that you have stepped into the circle of our conflict with the soldiers. Whether you intended to or not, you are now part of this story. And we must decide together what happens next." Clara wanted to refuse. She wanted to stay at her trading post, clean up the mess, pretend everything could go back to normal. But she knew that was impossible. Webb would return, probably with more soldiers, and next time the Apache warriors might not be there to drive him away. "All right," she said. "I'll come. But I need to secure the post first. Everything I own is here. Bring what is most precious. The rest—" Nahal gestured at the scattered goods. "The rest can be replaced." "Your life cannot." Clara packed quickly. Her mother's jewelry, her father's journal, what money she had hidden, dried food, water, and a few tools. Everything fit into a single canvas sack. Looking at it, she realized how little she actually needed. How much of what filled the trading post was just things. They left through the back, taking a narrow trail that wound through the rocks. Clara glanced back once at the trading post, the building her father had been so proud of, the home where she'd spent the last 2 years of her life. She didn't know if she'd ever see it again. The Apache camp was hidden in a canyon 5 miles north, invisible from any trail unless you knew exactly where to look. As Clara and Nahali approached, she felt dozens of eyes watching from the rocks above. Warriors, she assumed, posted as sentries. The camp itself was smaller than she'd expected. Perhaps 20 people total, mostly women, children, and elders. The warriors who'd driven off Webb's soldiers stood at the edges, alert and armed. These weren't the fearsome raiders of frontier stories. They were families, trying to survive in an increasingly hostile land. An older woman approached as they entered camp. She said something in Apache to Nahali, her eyes flicking to Clara with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "My mother, Dawa," Nahali explained. "She thanks you for saving her son, but she also wonders if you have brought more danger to us." "I hope not," Clara said honestly. "I didn't mean to cause problems for anyone. I couldn't leave him there to die." The woman studied Clara for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. "She accepts you," Nahali said. "That is good. Not everyone will." He led Clara to the center of camp where a fire burned despite the heat. Round it sat several men and women, their faces weathered by sun and hardship. The scarred warrior from this morning, Delshay, sat at what was clearly the position of honor. Delshay spoke in Apache, his voice carrying authority. Nahal translated. "He says you are welcome in our camp. He says what you did took great courage, and that courage should be honored. But he also says we must speak truthfully about what comes next." Clara sat down cross-legged by the fire, trying to appear calm despite her racing heart. "I'm listening." What followed was the longest conversation of Clara's life. Delshay spoke, Nahali translated, and slowly Clara began to understand the impossible situation these people faced. They weren't raiders. They weren't warriors looking for conflict. They were the remnants of a larger band that had been moved to reservation land 3 years ago, land so barren it could barely support life. The government had promised supplies, food, and support. Those promises had been broken repeatedly. Children had starved. Elders had frozen during the winter because the promised blankets never arrived. 6 months ago, a group of young warriors, not from Delshay's band, had raided some supply wagons in desperation. Lieutenant Webb had responded by attacking the nearest Apache camp he could find, regardless of whether they were involved. That camp had been Delshay's. He killed 23 people, Nahal said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Most of them women and children. My sister, Nalin, was among them. She was playing with dolls when the soldiers came. Clara felt tears burning her eyes. I'm so sorry. That's murder. Not war. Murder. Webb calls it justice, Nahal continued. He says we are all guilty because we are all Apache. That one band's crimes justify punishment for all. His jaw tightened. And now, because you freed me, he will say you are guilty too. Guilty by association. Delshay spoke again and Nahali translated, he says Webb will not rest until he has destroyed us completely. The lieutenant has made this personal. He wants to prove that Apache cannot defy him without consequences. And now you are part of that equation, so what do I do? Clara asked. I can't go back to my trading post. Webb made that clear. But I can't stay here either. I'd just bring more trouble to you. There is a third option, Nahal said after consulting with Delshay. We are planning to leave this territory, to go north into the mountains where the cavalry cannot easily follow. There are places there where we can live, at least for a while. You could come with us, Clara stared at him. You're asking me to leave everything? To abandon my home, my life, and go into hiding with you? I am asking you to survive, Nahale said simply. Because if you stay, Webb will kill you or see you hanged. There is no third option for you anymore. Clara stood and walked to the edge of the camp, looking out at the desert she'd called home for 2 years. Every rock, every cactus, every shifting shadow was familiar. This was her father's dream, the life he'd built for his family. And now she was supposed to just walk away from it? But what choice did she have? Nahale was right. Webb wouldn't rest until she was punished. And even if she survived a trial, even if somehow she convinced a judge that she'd done the right thing, her life here was over. No one would trade with her. No one would trust her. She'd be marked as an Apache sympathizer in a territory where that could get you killed. She turned back to find Nahile standing behind her. Your uncle is very generous, she said quietly. But I can't ask you to take responsibility for me. You have enough burdens. You saved my life, Nahale said. In my culture, that creates a bond, a responsibility. I cannot simply walk away and leave you to face Webb's anger alone. In my culture, we call that being stubborn, Clara said with a weak smile. Then perhaps our cultures are not so different after all. They were interrupted by a shout from one of the sentries. Everyone in camp tensed, hands moving to weapons. A warrior came running down from his position, speaking rapidly in Apache. Nahale's expression darkened. Soldiers, coming from the south, at least 20 of them, moving fast toward your trading post. Webb's going back, Clara breathed. He's probably going to occupy it, wait for me to return. Or burn it, Nahale said grimly. To punish you. To show what happens to those who defy him. Clara felt something break inside her chest. Her father had built that trading post with his own hands, log by log during the hottest summer on record. Her mother had sewn the curtains, planted the small garden, turned a rough frontier building into something resembling a home. And now it would burn, because Clara had chosen compassion over obedience. She made a decision in that moment. I want to see it, she said. One last time before... It is too dangerous, Nahale protested. I know. But it's my home. I need to say goodbye properly. Delshay spoke and Nahale sighed. My uncle says he understands. He says that saying goodbye to the places we love is important, even when, especially when, those places are taken from us by force. He paused. But he also says that if you go, I must go with you, to keep you safe. And if we are caught, we face Webb's justice together. Clara looked at this man she'd freed just 24 hours ago, this stranger who was now offering to risk his life again for her. You don't have to do that. Yes, Nahale said simply. I do. They left camp as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Nahale led them along paths Clara had never seen, routes that stuck to rocky ground where they'd leave no tracks, that used every bit of available cover. He moved like part of the desert itself, and Clara did her best to follow his example. They reached a ridge overlooking the trading post just as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of red and gold. Clara's heart sank at what she saw. Webb's soldiers surrounded the trading post, They'd brought wagons, probably to haul away anything valuable. But they weren't loading goods. They were piling them in the yard, building a bonfire of everything Clara owned. As she watched, Webb emerged from the building carrying her father's journal, the one she'd been forced to leave behind. He opened it, made a show of reading a page, then tossed it onto the pile. "No," Clara whispered. Webb lit a torch and threw it onto the pile. Flames leaped up immediately, consuming wood and fabric and memory. Within minutes, the fire had spread to the trading post itself. The dry wood caught quickly, and soon the entire structure was ablaze. Clara watched her father's dream burn. She watched 2 years of her life turn to ash and smoke. And she understood that this wasn't just about destroying a building. This was Webb sending a message. This is what happens to those who defy me. "I am sorry," Nahal said quietly beside her. "I know what it means to watch your home destroyed." Clara wiped tears from her cheeks. "He thinks this will break me. That I'll come crawling back, begging for mercy. Will you?" "No," Clara said, her voice hardening. "I'll survive. I'll adapt. And someday, somehow, I'll make sure he answers for what he's done. To your people, to my home, to everyone he's hurt." They watched until the fire burned itself out, until all that remained was smoking ruins and ash. Then they turned and made their way back to the Apache camp, where Clara's new life, whatever that looked like, was waiting. She didn't look back. There was no point. Her old life was gone, consumed by flames and hatred and a lieutenant's wounded pride. But Clara Brennan was still alive, still free. And as long as she drew breath, she would fight. Not with weapons, but with the same stubborn courage that had made her free a chained man under Moonlight. Webb thought he'd won. He thought he'd destroyed her. He had no idea how wrong he was. The Apache band left their canyon camp before dawn, moving silently through the darkness like ghosts. Clara walked near the middle of the group, between Nahali and his mother, Dawa. The older woman still hadn't spoken directly to Clara, but she'd given her a blanket and a pair of worn moccasins, far better for desert travel than Clara's leather boots. They traveled north, always north, keeping to difficult terrain where cavalry horses couldn't easily follow. Delche led them along paths that seemed impossible, narrow ledges above steep drops, passages through thick brush that looked impassable until you were right on top of them, dry washes that wound through the rocks like snakes. Clara struggled to keep up. The pace was relentless, and the Apache moved with practiced efficiency that spoke of too much experience fleeing from soldiers. Children who should have been complaining about the difficult journey remained silent and serious. Even the youngest understood that noise could mean death. On the second day, they stopped to rest in a small canyon with a hidden spring. Clara collapsed against a rock, her feet bleeding despite the moccasins, her muscles screaming from the constant climbing. Nahali sat beside her, offering a piece of dried meat. "You are doing well. Many settlers could not keep this pace." "I don't feel like I'm doing well," Clara said, accepting the food gratefully. "I feel like I'm about to collapse, but you have not collapsed. That is what matters." Nahale looked toward where Delche was consulting with the other warriors. "We should reach the mountain camps by tomorrow evening, if we maintain this speed. There we will be safer." "Safer," Clara repeated. "Not safe. In this territory there is no such thing as safe anymore. Only safer." Nahale's expression darkened. "The soldiers push further into the mountains every year. They call it progress. We call it the end of our world." Clara was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why did you become a scout for the cavalry?" "If they're your enemy." Nahale was silent for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, 2 years ago I believed cooperation was possible. I thought if we helped them, if we proved we could live together, they would leave us in peace. I was young and stupid." "You're still young," Clara pointed out, "but no longer stupid." He met her eyes. "I learned that men like Webb do not want cooperation. They want submission or elimination. There is no middle ground." Before Clara could respond, a warning whistle came from one of the scouts. Everyone in camp froze, then moved with practiced precision, women and children melting into the rocks, warriors taking defensive positions, all of it happening in near silence. Delche signaled, and 2 warriors moved forward to investigate. Clara pressed herself against a boulder, hardly daring to breathe. Nahale positioned himself between her and the direction the warning had come from, a knife appearing in his hand. Minutes passed like hours. Then the scouts returned, speaking rapidly in Apache. Delshay's expression shifted from tense to confused, then to something Clara couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she whispered to Nahale. "Not soldiers," he said slowly. "Traders. A Mexican man and his wife with pack mules. They say they are looking for you." Clara's heart leaped. "For me?" She stood and moved toward the front of camp, where Delshay was speaking with two people. A weathered Mexican man, probably in his 50s, and a small, fierce-looking woman about the same age. They turned when they saw Clara, and the woman's face broke into a smile. "Señorita Clara, gracias a Dios, we have found you." Clara recognized them now. Carlos and Maria Fuentes, traders who'd passed through her post many times over the years. Her father had trusted them, and they'd always dealt fairly, Carlos. "Maria, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you," Carlos said, his English accented but clear. "We went to your trading post 2 days ago. We found it burned, soldiers everywhere. We asked questions in the nearby settlement, very careful questions, and learned what happened. That you freed the Apache prisoner, that Lieutenant Webb is hunting for you. So you came looking." Clara was amazed. "That's incredibly dangerous." "Your father was good to us," Maria said simply. "When others would not trade with Mexicans, when others cheated us, he treated us with respect. We owe him. And we owe you." She gestured to the pack mules. "We brought supplies. Food, medicine, blankets, things these people need." Delshay spoke in Apache and Nahale translated. "He says your generosity is noted and appreciated. He asks what you want in return." "Nothing," Carlos said firmly. "Well, perhaps one thing, information. Lieutenant Webb is not just hunting the Apache. He's hunting Señorita Clara specifically. He has offered a reward, $50 to anyone who provides information leading to her capture." Clara felt her stomach drop. $50 was a fortune out here. "That's more than most people make in 6 months." "Yes, which means you cannot trust anyone in the settlements. Someone will betray you for that money eventually." Carlos looked at Delshay. "But we also heard something else. The territorial governor is coming to Fort Bowie next month. He is investigating complaints about Lieutenant Webb's methods. If you could reach him, tell him your story, show him what Webb has done." "The governor would never listen to an Apache sympathizer," Clara said. "Perhaps not to just an Apache sympathizer," Maria agreed. "But to a witness? To someone who can testify about Webb's brutality, his burning of civilian property, his illegal actions, that he might listen to." Hope flickered in Clara's chest for the first time in days. "You really think so?" "I think it is worth trying," Carlos said, "because the alternative is living as a fugitive forever, always running, always hiding, and that is no life for anyone." Delshay and Nahal spoke quietly in Apache, their expressions serious. Finally, Delshay turned to Carlos and spoke through Nahale. "My uncle says this is a dangerous hope. Governors and their promises are like rain in the desert. Sometimes they come, often they do not. But he also says that a chance, even a small one, is better than no chance at all." Nahale looked at Clara. "He asks if you would be willing to do this, to travel to Fort Bowie and speak to this governor." "Fort Bowie." Clara felt her mouth go dry. "That's Webb's headquarters. He'll have soldiers everywhere." "Yes," Carlos agreed, "which is why you would not go as Clara Brennan, fugitive. You would go as my niece, Carlota Fuentes, traveling with her aunt and uncle to sell goods at the fort. We have papers, documents. No one would question it, except Webb," Clara pointed out. "He knows what I look like." "Does he?" Maria asked shrewdly. "How many times did you speak with him?" 3, 4, and always while he was in a hurry. Always when his attention was elsewhere. Men like that do not really see women, especially young women. We are invisible to them." Clara thought back to her interactions with Webb. Maria was right. He'd barely looked at her, had treated her more as an obstacle than a person. "It might work," she admitted slowly. "But what about them?" She gestured to the Apache around her. "If I leave, if something goes wrong—" Delshay spoke again and Nahale translated. "He says we will continue north to the mountain camps as planned. If you succeed, if the governor listens, perhaps there can be justice. If you fail," he paused, "if you fail, we are no worse off than we already are. And you will have tried, which is more than most would do." "I will go with her," Nahale said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. Delshay spoke sharply in Apache, clearly objecting. "No," Nahale said firmly in English so everyone could understand. "Clara saved my life. She lost everything because of it. I will not let her face this danger alone." He looked at his uncle. "You taught me that debts of honor must be repaid. This is my debt to repay." Delshay's jaw tightened, but after a long moment he nodded. He spoke in Apache, his voice heavy with emotion. "He says you are foolish," Nahali translated with a slight smile, "but also brave, and that he is proud of you, even as he fears for you." Carlos looked between Nahali and Clara. "You realize this makes everything more complicated? If soldiers recognize you, they will not," Nahali said. "I can pass for Mexican if needed. My father was half Mexican. I speak Spanish fluently, and I know how to make myself invisible when necessary." Over the next hour, they made their plans. Carlos and Maria would continue on to the mountain camps with their supplies, helping Delshay's band establish themselves. Clara and Nahali would travel back south with 2 of the pack mules, disguised as young Mexican traders heading to Fort Bowie. As the sun began to set, Dawa approached Clara. The older woman still hadn't spoken to her directly, but now she held out a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "She says this is for you," Nahali translated. "Traditional Apache traveling clothes. They will help you move through the desert more easily. And she says," his voice caught slightly, "she says you have a good heart. That her son is lucky to have found a friend like you." Clara accepted the bundle, tears stinging her eyes. "Tell her thank you. Tell her I'll do everything I can to help." Dawa spoke again, and this time Nahali smiled as he translated. "She says she knows you will, because stubbornness runs deep in some people, and she can see it in your eyes." That night Clara lay wrapped in her blanket, staring up at the stars scattered across the black sky. Tomorrow she would leave the relative safety of the Apache band and head back into dangerous territory. She would walk into Fort Bowie itself, the heart of Webb's power, and try to convince a territorial governor that an army lieutenant was corrupt and murderous. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was probably going to get her killed, but it was also the only chance any of them had. Beside her, she heard Nahali shifting in his own blanket. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "You?" "Also terrified, but also grateful." "For what?" "For meeting someone brave enough to do the impossible. It gives me hope that maybe there are others like you. That maybe not everyone in this territory wants us dead or gone." Clara thought about that. "There are others," she said finally. "Good people who just want to live their lives, raise their families, survive the hard times. But good people are often quiet. They don't make noise. They don't fight back. They just endure." "And you?" Nahal asked. "Are you one of those quiet, enduring people?" Clara smiled in the darkness. "I used to be. Before all this, I would have kept my head down, avoided trouble, pretended I didn't see the injustices around me." She paused. "But then I saw you chained to that post, and I couldn't be that person anymore. I couldn't look away. Sometimes it only takes one person refusing to look away to change everything, or to get everyone killed," Clara pointed out. "That too," Nahali agreed. "But I would rather die trying to do what is right than live knowing I did nothing." They were quiet for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through the rocks, the soft breathing of sleeping children. "Nahali," Clara said, "if this works, if the governor listens, what will you do? Where will you go?" He was silent for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. "Then I do not know. Before all this I had plans. I wanted to be a bridge between our peoples, to help find ways we could live together. But after what Webb did, after what I have seen," his voice hardened, "I am not sure bridges are possible anymore. Not while men like him are in power. But if he wasn't in power, if he faced justice, then perhaps there could be hope for something better." Nahal shifted to look at her across the small distance between them. "Is that what you are fighting for, hope?" "I'm fighting for the truth," Clara said. "For the chance to tell what really happened, without Webb's lies drowning out the facts. And yes, I suppose that is hope. Hope that truth still matters, that justice is still possible, even if justice comes too late for those who have already died." Clara thought of Nahali's young sister, of all the people killed in Webb's attack, of her own parents taken by fever. "Especially then," she said quietly, "because the dead deserve to be remembered honestly. They deserve to have their stories told without lies." Dawn came too quickly. Clara and Nahali dressed in their new clothes. She in a simple Mexican dress Maria had provided, her hair braided and covered with a shawl. He in worn work clothes that made him look like any young laborer traveling with his family. They loaded their pack mules with legitimate trade goods Carlos provided as cover. Delche gave them his blessing, touching Nahali's forehead and speaking words Clara couldn't understand, but felt the weight of. Other members of the band came forward to say goodbye, warriors gripping Nahali's arm in farewell, women pressing small bundles of food into their hands, children watching with solemn eyes. Last was Dawa. She embraced her son fiercely, speaking rapidly in Apache. When she finally released him, there were tears on her weathered cheeks. She says to come back, Nahali translated, his own voice rough with emotion. She says she cannot lose another child. Tell her I'll make sure he comes back, Clara said. I promise. As the sun climbed higher, Clara and Nahali headed south, retracing the path the Apache band had taken north. The desert spread before them, beautiful and deadly, holding both danger and the slim chance of redemption. Behind them, Delche's band continued their journey to the mountains. Ahead, Fort Bowie waited, along with Lieutenant Webb, and a reckoning that had been building since that moonlit night when Clara chose compassion over safety. She touched the small bundle Dawa had given her, feeling the soft deerskin. Inside were traditional Apache traveling clothes, a gift, a blessing, and a reminder of what she was fighting for. Not just her own life, not even just Nahali's life, but for all the lives caught between two worlds, all the people trying to survive in a territory where hatred and fear too often drowned out reason and mercy. It was too much responsibility for one 17-year-old girl. But then again, Clara had learned that sometimes the impossible was the only option left, so she would do the impossible. Or die trying. Fort Bowie rose from the desert like a monument to military power, wooden walls, watchtowers, and the constant movement of soldiers drilling in the yard. Clara felt her stomach twist as she and Nahali approached the gates with their pack mules, playing their roles as young Mexican traders. Papers, the guard at the gate demanded, barely looking at them. Carlos had provided documents identifying Clara as Carlota Fuentes and Nahali as Miguel Alvarez, both traders from Tucson. The guard glanced at the papers, stamped them with barely concealed boredom, and waved them through. Just like that, they were inside Webb's fortress. The fort was busy with activity, soldiers everywhere, civilian workers, other traders setting up in the designated market area. Clara kept her head down, her shawl pulled forward to shadow her face. Beside her, Nahali moved with casual confidence, playing the part of a young Mexican laborer perfectly. They set up their small stall in the market, displaying the goods Carlos had provided, blankets, dried peppers, simple pottery. Other traders nodded in greeting, but otherwise ignored them. Just two more faces in the constant flow of commerce that kept a frontier fort functioning. The governor's not here yet, Nahali murmured in Spanish, pretending to arrange their display. I heard soldiers talking. He arrives tomorrow afternoon. Clara's heart sank. A full day and night in the fort, trying to stay invisible, trying to avoid Webb. We can't stay here that long. Someone will recognize us. We have no choice, unless you want to wait outside and miss him entirely. He was right, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Clara sold a blanket to a sergeant's wife, then some dried peppers to a civilian cook. Normal transactions, forgettable faces. She was starting to think they might actually pull this off. Then Lieutenant Webb walked into the market. Clara's blood turned to ice. She kept her head down, focusing on arranging pottery, praying he would pass by without noticing them. But Webb stopped at a nearby stall, discussing something with the trader there. He was less than 20 feet away. Nahali's hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing gently. Stay calm, the gesture said. Don't panic. Webb finished his business and turned, his eyes sweeping across the market. For one terrible moment, his gaze passed over Clara. She held her breath, certain he would recognize her, but his eyes moved on without pausing. To him, she was just another Mexican girl in a shawl. Beneath his notice, he walked away and Clara could breathe again. That was too close, she whispered. It will not be the last time, Nahal said grimly. We need to be prepared to leave quickly if necessary. They spent the afternoon selling goods and listening. Clara's Spanish was rough but adequate, and she picked up valuable information from the conversations around them. The governor was coming to investigate reports of excessive force against Apache bands. Several officers at the fort were nervous. Webb, according to gossip, was confident he could justify his actions. "He's going to lie," Clara said as they packed up at sunset. "He'll tell the governor his version of events, and who will contradict him? His own soldiers." "That is why we are here," Nahale reminded her, "to tell the truth before his lies can take root." They spent the night in a corner of the civilian quarters, a cramped room they shared with 3 other trading families. Clara barely slept, starting at every sound, certain that soldiers would burst through the door to arrest them. But morning came quietly, and they returned to their market stall, going through the motions of trade while waiting for the governor's arrival. He came at 2 in the afternoon, announced by trumpet calls and the sharp commands of soldiers forming ranks. Governor Richard Walsh was a silver-haired man in his 60s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent years in politics. He rode through the fort gates with an entourage of aides and officials, all looking slightly uncomfortable in the desert heat. Lieutenant Webb met him personally, all military precision and formal courtesy. Clara watched from her stall as they exchanged words. Then Webb led the governor toward the fort's headquarters building. "This is our chance," Nahale said, "while they're meeting." "We can't just walk into a meeting between a governor and a military officer," Clara protested. "No, but we can wait outside. And when the governor emerges, we can speak to him." It was risky, but so was everything else they'd done. Clara and Nahale abandoned their stall and made their way toward the headquarters, trying to look like they had legitimate business there. They waited outside for 3 hours. The sun beat down mercilessly, and several soldiers gave them suspicious looks, but no one actually challenged them. Just 2 Mexican traders, probably hoping to sell something to the governor's entourage. Finally, the door opened, and Governor Walsh emerged with Webb at his side. They were talking, and Webb's expression was satisfied, confident. "Assured that all actions taken were within proper military authority," Webb was saying. "The Apache in this territory are hostile elements, and firm measures are necessary to maintain order." "I understand your position, Lieutenant," Walsh said, though he sounded unconvinced. "However, some of the reports I've received suggest excessive—" "Governor Walsh!" Clara called out, her voice louder than she'd intended. Everyone turned. Webb's expression shifted from confident to furious in an instant as he recognized her despite the disguise. "You!" he snarled, his hand moving toward his pistol. "Don't move, Lieutenant," Clara said quickly, stepping forward with her hands raised. "Governor Walsh, my name is Clara Brennan. Was the owner of Brennan's trading post. I have information about Lieutenant Webb's conduct that you need to hear." Walsh's eyebrows rose. "Miss Brennan? The young woman involved in freeing the Apache prisoner?" "Yes, sir. And I can explain exactly what happened if you'll listen. The truth, not the version Lieutenant Webb has been telling." Webb's face had gone dark red. "This woman is a wanted fugitive, Governor. She's under arrest for aiding and abetting an enemy combatant for—" "I'm not under arrest yet," Clara interrupted, "which means I still have the right to speak. And what I have to say might explain why Lieutenant Webb is so desperate to silence me." Walsh looked between them, his politician's instincts clearly sensing something important. "I think we should continue this conversation inside. Lieutenant Webb, Miss Brennan, and—" He looked at Nahale. "Your companion?" "Miguel Alvarez," Nahale said in perfect Spanish. "A witness to some of these events, senor." "Very well. All of you inside. And Lieutenant, keep your hand away from your weapon. Shall determine who's under arrest and who isn't." The next 2 hours were the most intense of Clara's life. Sitting in the governor's temporary office, with Webb glaring at her from across the room, Clara told her story. She described finding Nahale chained as bait, freeing him, Webb's burning of her trading post. She talked about the Apache families trying to survive on barren reservation land, about broken promises and stolen supplies. Webb interrupted constantly, calling her a liar, an Apache sympathizer, someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted. But Walsh listened, asking sharp questions, taking notes. Then Nahale spoke. In careful, measured English, he described the attack on his band's camp, the death of innocents, including children, Webb's plan to use him as bait to kill more Apache. "This is all lies," Webb insisted. "This man is a known fugitive, wanted for crimes against—" "What crimes specifically?" Walsh interrupted. "What evidence do you have?" Webb hesitated. "He was found near the site of the supply wagon raid." "So was half the territory," Walsh said dryly. "That's not evidence." "That's proximity." He turned to Clara. Miss Brennan, you say Lieutenant Webb burned your trading post. Can anyone verify this? I can, Senor Governor, a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Carlos Fuentes stood there, hat in hand. I saw the burn post with my own eyes, and I spoke with soldiers in the area who admitted, after much tequila, that Lieutenant Webb ordered it burned to teach the girl a lesson about defying military authority. Walsh's expression hardened. Is this true, Lieutenant? I destroyed civilian property being used to harbor a fugitive, Webb said defensively. That's within my authority during what? We're not at war, Lieutenant. These Apache bands are on reservation land, where they're supposed to be protected under federal treaty. And this young woman was a civilian on her own property. Walsh stood. I've heard enough. Lieutenant Webb, I'm suspending you from duty pending a full investigation. You'll surrender your command immediately. Webb's face went white, then red, then back to white. You can't do this. I have authority from the military district commander, who answers to the territorial government, which answers to me, Walsh said coldly. You've exceeded your authority, Lieutenant. You've destroyed civilian property, possibly committed murder, and by your own admission used a prisoner as bait in a trap. That's not military action. That's criminal behavior. Those Apache are savages. They've been raiding, killing, have they? Walsh gestured to Nahali. This young man speaks perfect English, conducted himself with dignity during this entire conversation, and by all evidence was simply trying to survive along with his family. Where is the savage behavior, Lieutenant? Because from where I'm standing, the only savage actions I've heard about are yours. Webb stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually draw his weapon. But then his military training reasserted itself, and he drew himself rigidly to attention. I'll be filing an appeal with the district commander, and with Washington if necessary. This is a mistake, Governor, a terrible mistake. Then the appeals process will sort it out, Walsh said. In the meantime, you're confined to quarters. Dismissed. Webb left, his boots striking the floor like hammer blows. When the door closed behind him, Walsh sat back down heavily. Miss Brennan, Mr. Alvarez, thank you for bringing this to my attention. What Lieutenant Webb has done is disturbing, deeply disturbing. He paused. However, I must be honest with you. Webb has powerful friends in the military. This investigation will be difficult, and there's no guarantee he'll face real consequences. Clara felt her hopes deflating. So he gets away with it. I didn't say that. I said it will be difficult. Walsh leaned forward. But you've given me enough to start a formal inquiry. I'll be speaking with other witnesses, examining records, building a case. It will take time. But if what you've told me is true, and I believe it is, then Lieutenant Webb's career is over. And in the meantime, Nahal asked, in the meantime, you should both leave the fort quickly. Webb may be suspended, but he still has loyal soldiers, and I can't guarantee your safety if you stay. Walsh pulled out a document and wrote quickly, This is a letter of safe conduct. It states that you're both under my protection, traveling as witnesses in an official investigation. It won't stop everyone, but it should give pause to any soldier who tries to interfere with you. Clara accepted the document with shaking hands. Thank you, Governor. You don't know what this means, I think I do, Walsh said quietly. I've been in politics long enough to know that the truth doesn't always win. But every once in a while, someone brave enough to tell it can change things. He stood. Now go, before Webb recovers from his shock and does something else we'll all regret. Clara and Nahali left through the fort's back entrance, abandoning their market stall and mules, traveling light and fast. By the time the sun set, they were miles away, heading north again toward the mountains. Do you think he'll really follow through? Nahal asked as they made camp that night. Or was that just politicians' talk? I don't know, Clara admitted, but I think he meant it. I think he was genuinely shocked by what Webb's been doing. Shocked enough to fight the military establishment? Maybe, we'll see. They were quiet for a while, both exhausted from the tension of the day. Then Nahale said, Thank you. For what? For not giving up. For being stubborn enough to walk into that fort and tell the truth, even knowing you might not walk back out. He smiled slightly. My mother was right about you. What did she say? That you have the heart of a warrior, even if you do not carry weapons. And that stubbornness and courage are sometimes the same thing. Clara laughed, surprising herself. My father used to say something similar, that the difference between stubborn and determined was just whether you succeeded or not. Over the next 3 days, they made their way back to the mountain camps where Delshay's band had settled. The reunion was emotional. Dawa embraced her son fiercely. Carlos and Maria reported that the supplies had made a significant difference, and Delshay listened intently as Clara and Nahali described their meeting with the governor. "You have done something important," Delshay said through Nahali's translation. "You have made our truth heard. Whether justice follows, only time will tell. But the truth being heard, that itself is a kind of justice. What will you do now?" Clara asked. Delshay gestured to the mountains around them. "We will survive. We will live. We will hope that men like Governor Walsh succeed in their efforts. And we will remember those like you who stood with us when standing with us meant risking everything." Clara spent 2 weeks with the Apache band, helping where she could, learning about their culture, their stories, their dreams for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. She learned words in their language, how to make bread from mesquite flour, how to read the desert signs that meant water or danger or change coming. And she learned that people were just people, regardless of what language they spoke or what clothes they wore. They loved their children, mourned their dead, told jokes, argued about small things, and held on to hope even when hope seemed foolish. One morning, a rider arrived in camp, one of Carlos's friends carrying a letter. It was from Governor Walsh. Clara's hands shook as she read it aloud. Translating for those who didn't speak English. "Miss Brennan, I write to inform you that Lieutenant Marcus Webb has been formally charged with destruction of civilian property, conduct unbecoming an officer, and excessive use of force resulting in civilian deaths. He will face military tribunal in 3 months' time in Santa Fe. Your testimony will be required. Furthermore, I have initiated a broader investigation into conditions on the Apache reservations and the treatment of native peoples in this territory. Your account of broken promises and inadequate supplies has been corroborated by multiple sources. This is not justice yet, but it is a beginning. You are free to return to your property. I have arranged for the territorial government to provide funds for rebuilding your trading post as compensation for its wrongful destruction. It is not enough, I know, but it is something. Respectfully, Governor Richard Walsh." Clara lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. Round her, the Apache band was silent. Then Delshay spoke and Nahali translated. "He says this is good. That Webb will face justice is good. That you can return home is good. But he also says—" Nahali paused, emotion thick in his voice. "He says that you will always have a home here with us if you choose. That you are part of our story now, and we do not forget those who stand with us in dark times." Clara wiped her tears and looked around at these people who had welcomed her, protected her, trusted her. "Tell him I'm honored, and tell him that rebuilding the trading post doesn't mean I'm leaving you behind. Tell him I'll rebuild it as a place where all people are welcome, where Apache and settlers and Mexicans can trade fairly and honestly. A place where the kind of hatred Webb represents has no power." Nahali smiled as he translated. Delshay responded, and the smile grew wider. "He says your father would be proud, and that when you are ready to rebuild, his people will help. That together, we will build something new. Not Apache or settler, but something better, something hopeful." 3 months later, Clara stood in a military courtroom in Santa Fe, testifying against Lieutenant Marcus Webb. She told her story clearly and completely, facing down Webb's glare, his lawyers' attempts to discredit her, the whispers from military officers who thought she was a traitor. Nahali testified too, as did other witnesses Governor Walsh had found, soldiers who'd grown disgusted with Webb's methods, civilians who'd seen the burned trading post, even other Apache who'd survived the attack on Delshay's camp. Webb was found guilty on all charges. He was dishonorably discharged from the army and sentenced to 10 years in prison. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to balance the lives he'd taken, the families he'd destroyed. But it was something. It was accountability. It was truth prevailing over lies, at least this once.